Greetings all, welcome back to Eye of the Beholder, where we review 20 years of Dungeons & Dragons miniatures produced by WOTC and WizKids during the 20-year time span of 2003 through 2023. Having just finished our review of giant miniatures, we now go in the opposite direction and take a look at Goblinoids, starting with the innocuous but ubiquitous Goblins. If you ever started your player character's career at first level, and let's be honest, that's the only way to do it, your PCs have fought goblins. Almost every low-level module has them. Hell, Keep of the Borderlands had 2 separate goblin tribes. They are ruthless to those weaker than they are. However, unfortunately for them, few are. Therefore, they rely on ambush, ingenuity, and if possible, overwhelming numbers to prevail in combat. If facing a superior foe, they retreat if possible, surrender if necessary. Production note: WOTC released Goblin miniatures every year from 2003 through 2009, while WizKids had them in 7 of the 9 years between 2014 and 2023. So we're going to review Goblin miniatures by year, but we'll still give out individual scores. From 2003, we get 3 Goblins. The Goblin Sneak from Harbinger, and the Goblin Skirmisher and Goblin Warrior from Dragon Eye. Coloring is about the same on all 3, brown bodies and dark brown or black clothing. And while it's hard to see, all 3 do have distinct facial features. We get a variety of weapons here. The Sneak is armed with a crossbow, the Skirmisher has a pair of javelins, and the Warrior is armed with a mace and shield. Of the 3, only the Skirmisher has a somewhat interesting pose, up on one foot as if winding up to throw his javelin. Scores: Goblin Sneak, Pain 11, Pose 12, Playability 12, Pizzazz 10, for a score of 45. Goblin Skirmisher, Paint 12, Pose 13, Playability 13, Pizzazz 12, for a score of 50. And for the Goblin Warrior, Paint 12, Pose 12, Playability 12, Pizzazz 12, for a score of 48. We get 4 Goblins in 2004. From Archfiends we get Snig the Axe, from Giants of Legend we get Blue, and from Aberrations we get a Decanter Goblin and Silent Wolf Goblin. Based on his armor and weapons, not to mention getting a proper name, Snig the Axe must be a Goblin Chief at minimum. His namesake is quite prominent, held up and ready to strike. Armed in chainmail that stands out against his yellow skin, he also carries a brace of javelins on his back. Finally, his facial features are quite distinct. Note the pig-like nose. Blue, obviously named for his skin color, appears to be a shaman or witch doctor based on the staff he carries. Garbed in brown and black robes, also note the stone set at the top of the shaft, denoting a potential magical shaft. Sorry, that sounds dirty. The Decanter Goblin is larger and more aggressive than the smaller cousins. Often found in mines, their most distinct feature is the large horn on his head. The mini is solid if underwhelming, with little paint differential between the skin and clothing, and set in a fairly standard pose. Horn and teeth do stand out though. Finally, this Silent Wolf Goblin comes directly at you brandishing twin swords, which, along with the helm, are the only color contrast we get on this mini. I do like its aggressiveness though. Scores: Snig the Axe, after looking at it again, I can't believe it, but 100. Blue, Paint 13, Pose 10, Playability 12, Pizzazz 11, for a score of 46. Decanter Goblin, Paint 9, Pose 11, Playability 10, Pizzazz 10, for a score of 40. Silent Wolf Goblin, Paint 12, Pose 15, Playability 14, Pizzazz 14, for a score of 55. After a flurry of goblins the first 2 years, WOTC only gives us one in 2005, the Goblin Adept from Death Knell. Done in lighter browns than his predecessors, he gives off a tribal vibe to me with the spear, tooth necklace, and whatever that is on the top of his head. Pointing out his enemies with one hand while brandishing his spear in the other, I'm guessing he's somewhere between chief and cannon fodder in the tribe's hierarchy. Score: Paint 13, Pose 13, Playability 14, Pizzazz 14, for a score of 54. "2006 gives us another 4 goblins to choose from. 3 from the War Drum set: Goblin Blackblade, Goblin Underboss, and Snig Warg Rider. We cap off the year with an Acheron Goblin from Blood Wars. The Goblin Blackblade name fits. His sword is certainly black, as is his chainmail. Posed slightly crouched, his face contorted in a sneer. Look closely, is that a nose ring? The Goblin Underboss is certainly well armored with helm, chainmail, shield, and greaves. Also posed crouched, he holds his barbed sword at the ready. Snig Warg Rider is obviously a mounted version of Snig the Axe, and while it's très cool that we get a mounted version of Snig, it's not as detailed as a standalone mini, coloring is not as vibrant, and the detailing is not as sharp. Finally, as Acheron is one of the outer planes, I can only assume that an Acheron Goblin is from said plane, known for its constant warfare, which this goblin seems well suited for with his full plate armor and serrated axe. For such a small mini, there's a lot of nice detailing on that armor. Scores: Goblin Blackblade, Paint 10, Pose 10, Playability 13, Pizzazz 11, for a score of 44. Goblin Underboss, Paint 13, Pose 14, Playability 15, Pizzazz 13, for a score of 55. Snig Warg Rider, Paint 17, Pose 21, Playability 18, Pizzazz 20, for a score of 76. Acheron Goblin, Paint 15, Pose 14, Playability 15, Pizzazz 15, for a score of 59. Back to single representation for 2007. This Grey Peak Goblin Archer from the Unhallowed set is all we get. Posed leaning back on his left foot as he draws his bow, his yellow skin is contrasted with black hair and brown leather armor. Interestingly, he has a shield strapped to his back, but no melee weapon. I guess he can hold it over his head as he runs away from sword and mace. Ideally, you should have a bunch of these to form a skirmish line to enhance playability. I have 8. Score: Paint 12, Pose 13, Playability 16, Pizzazz 13, for a score of 54. "2008 gives us a trio of goblins: the Goblin Picador from Dungeons of Dread, the Goblin Runner from Against the Giants, and the Lothbound Goblin from Demon Web. Picador is a bullfighting term, but other than the barbed lance, there is no connection. Note the coiled rope at the Picador's feet. I assume it's attached to the barbed lance to pierce its foe and drag it back kicking and screaming. Next, if you're going to call your mini a Goblin Runner, shouldn't it be running? Goblin standing around would be more appropriate. Dressed in black leather and armed with a small spear, it's usable but misnamed. Finally, based on its name, the Lothbound Goblin must be beholden to Loth, Demon Queen of Spiders and main deity of the Drow. Brown tunic over bright blue skin makes for a nice contrast, and his pose, in profile but head turned to the front with a malicious visage, is cool. Finally, I like his choice of weapons. A pickaxe seems appropriate. Scores: Goblin Picador, Paint 14, pose 15, playability 10, pizzazz 13 for a score of 52. Goblin Runner, paint 8, pose 7, playability 14, pizzazz 10 for a score of 39. Lothbound Goblin, paint 17, pose 15, playability 11, pizzazz 15 for a score of 58. WOTC goes out with a bang with a cool half-dozen goblins in 2009, two from each Monster Manual set. From Dangerous Delves, we get the Goblin Sharpshooter and Goblin Delver. From Legendary Evils, we get the Goblin Cutter and Iron Tooth. And from Savage Encounters, we get the Goblin Cleaver and Goblin Wolf Rider. The Goblin Sharpshooter is a callback to the Goblin Sneak in the initial Harbinger set with a crossbow cocked and ready. Much better detailing on this one, though, with green skin, dark clothing, and a dagger on the belt clearly visible. The Goblin Delver really only has one use as a porter. Posed hunched over with an enormous pack on his back, I do not envy him his lot in life. Specificity limits playability, but having a few of these in a large goblin band adds flavor. The Goblin Cutter has a roguelike feel to me. Clad in brown leathers, note the silver buckles, he appears to be in the midst of a backstab, and judging from his face, he really enjoys his work. Perhaps the best facial detailing to date. Based on the proper name, I assume Iron Tooth is a prominent war chief. Pose-wise, he's fully committed to cutting something in two pieces, two-handed axe posed way above his head, back fully arched, and legs driving forward to add power to the swing. Perhaps the Goblin Skull Cleaver is part of the Iron Tooth clan. It is posed similarly, although not quite as committed as Iron Tooth. Also, it rocks a sickle for a weapon rather than an axe. Detailing is a little weak, with little detailing on the gray body or face. Lastly, we get our second mounted goblin with the Goblin Wolf Rider. Unlike Snig, this mini is on a medium base, fitting for a wolfen rider. Posed charging forward with sword ready to cut down hapless foes, it's a very cool if not particularly well detailed miniature, although the lack of vibrant colors does make the sword pop. Scores. Goblin Sharpshooter, paint 13, pose 14, playability 15, pizzazz 13 for a score of 55. Goblin Delver, paint 13, pose 8. Paint 13, pose 18, playability 10, pizzazz 12 for a score of 53. Goblin Cutter, paint 12, pose 16, playability 18, pizzazz 15 for a score of 61. Iron Tooth, paint 16, pose 20, playability 15, pizzazz 18 for a score of 69. Goblin Skull Cleaver, paint 11, pose 15, playability 15, pizzazz 13 for a score of 54. And finally, Goblin Wolf Rider, paint 13, pose 20, playability 16, pizzazz 16 for a score of 65. WizKids starts off slow, goblin-wise, with only one goblin in 2014 from the inaugural Tyranny of Dragons set. Called a Goblin Warrior, it actually looks pretty good with yellow skin, distinctive features, and hair tied back in a high ponytail. Standing stoically with sword raised, it's actually better than almost all WOTC goblins produced. Score: paint 16, pose 14, playability 18, pizzazz 15 for a score of 63. "2015, same as 2014, only one goblin. This one from the Rage of Demons set. Called a goblin archer for obvious reasons. Same green skin, face, and ponytail as the Tyranny of Dragons goblin, but less. Take a closer look, you see what I mean. Armed with a bow rather than a sword makes it useful as part of a goblin band, but overall, not a very good mini. Score: Paint 10, Pose 8, Playability 13, Pizzazz 7, for a score of 38. WizKids cheats a bit to give us 4 goblins in 2017 by using their tried and true method of using duplicate sculpts with minor changes. Our first 2 goblins are from the Monster Manual 2 set. I like how WizKids has chosen us specific directions for goblins with the yellow hide and long black hair, although it's hard to see in the variation wearing the gray skull cap. Poses are again the same, just different weapons, sword for one and axe for the other. Our next 2 goblins are actually Batiri goblins, natives to the Forest of Chult, so anyone who has played the adventure, you know these guys are from the Tomb of Annihilation set. Smaller than other goblins, but still with the same yellow skin. With these guys, the difference isn't in weaponry, but headgear. Specifically, one is wearing a mask. Playability is limited, unless you're playing TOA. There's better options to use. Scores: Goblins, Paint 14, Pose 13, Playability 17, Pizzazz 14, for a score of 58. Batiri goblins, Paint 11, Pose 12, Playability 8, Pizzazz 11, for a score of 42. "2018 gives us 4 new goblins, 3 from Monster Menagerie 3, and 1 from the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. Our first goblin keeps the yellowish skin and black hair motif, but rather than a weapon, he holds aloft a torch with a bit of translucent flame at the tip. Again, not particularly playable on its own, but a great piece of atmosphere to add to an underground goblin warband. Nilbogs are goblins possessed by trickster spirits, almost a court jester if you will, often acting as an agent of chaos for foes and allies alike. The mini reflects this. Note the jovial face, the violet tunic and cap, and the staff capped with the carved goblin head. And of course, to maximize chaos, you need an invisible version as well. Finally, from Ravnica, we get Krenko, goblin mob boss, whose reputation must overcome his stature. Quite small, even by goblin standards, it's tough to make out much in the way of detail outside of the sword and helm. Scores: Goblin, Paint 12, Pose 13, Playability 12, Pizzazz 13, for a score of 50. Nilbog, Paint 13, Pose 14, Playability 12, Pizzazz 15, for a score of 54. Krenko, Paint 10, Pose 11, Playability 9, Pizzazz 9, for a score of 39. But wait, I hear some chuckleheads in the peanut gallery saying, "You said there were 4 goblins in 2018. And right you are. I just felt this guy deserved a spotlight all to himself. Meet the Goblin Hucker. What a ridiculous, impractical, and totally awesome miniature. We have a full catapult mounted on the shoulders of a hulking ogre who wears a giant shield as a breastplate and steadies the catapult with chains leading to spiked handles. And what does a hucker huck? Boulders? Don't be silly. It launches goblins at the enemy. We got a goblin awaiting launch in the bucket with another at the controls, sword about to sweep down with the order to loose. I don't know how playable it is, but you know, it might just be crazy enough to work. Score: Paint 22, Pose 25, Playability 10, Pizzazz 25, for a score of 82. WizKids takes a year off, then gives us the solitary goblin in 2020. From the Icewind Dale Rime of the Frost Maiden set, we get, naturally enough, this snow goblin. He's bundled up from the cold in a brown, fur-lined parka, with what looks like a dragon skull for a helm, and a long gray cloak for extra protection, with only his face exposed to the elements. Something has caught his attention as he points it out while holding a barbed sword at the ready. Score: Paint 14, Pose 12, Playability 11, Pizzazz 14, for a score of 51. "2021 gives us 4 goblins. From Snowbound, we get Spellix Romwad, who would make an excellent companion for our previous snow goblin. Also clad in thick brown and gray furs, he stands unarmed, making me think he is a magic user. We get better facial detailing than usual for a small mini, with a wry smile on his face and expressive eyes. Another detailing note, he has black claws on his exposed hands. Our next 3 all come from the Wild Beyond the Witchlight set. First up is this Feywild Goblin. There's not much color contrast between the yellow skin and tan tunic, but I do like the bucket helmet that is his only form of armor. Armed with a spear and a sneer, he stands ready to defend his clan. Next up is a named goblin, Chucklehead. Don't know much about him as I haven't played the adventure, but I assume he's a Neilbog as well. He seems to be enjoying himself, dancing about with a pumpkin on his head. Nice touch by WizKids to enhance stability with a bit of clear plastic under the raised foot. Our last goblin is also a named NPC, Jingle Jangle. Strictly from a playability standpoint, he's usable, holding a chain flail low to the ground with a bit of a bemused expression on his face. Due to the position of the flail, he's mounted on a medium base, making him look larger than he is. Scores: Spellix Romwad, Paint 15, Pose 15, Playability 11, Pizzazz 14, for a score of 55. Feywild Goblin, Paint 12, Pose 13, Playability 15, Pizzazz 12, for a score of 52. Chucklehead, Paint 16, Pose 17, Playability 7, Pizzazz 14, for a score of 54. Jingle Jangle, Paint 14, Pose 17, Playability 13, Pizzazz 15, for a score of 59. We get our last goblin in 2022's Mordenkainen Presents Monsters of the Multiverse set, and she's a girl. Dressed coquettishly in a flared skirt and a brown halter top, exposing a bit of yellow skin on the belly, don't fall for her womanly charms, she's a fighter. Did you notice the eye patch? Armed for bear with a spear in one hand and a sword in the other, her swirling pink ponytail indicates movement, appearing to be pivoting her body clockwise to drive the spear point into her foe's belly. Score: Paint 16, Pose 20, Playability 17, Pizzazz 21, for a score of 74. And with that, we are done with Goblin Minis. In my next video, we'll be looking at their bullying big brothers, the Hobgoblins. Until then, thanks to all for watching Eye of the Beholder. Like, comment, or subscribe if the spirit moves you. Until next time, au revoir.